Welcome to Outer Space, International Arts and Class Struggle Podcast.
Organising with a 30-person megaphone. An interview with Annie Levin. Hello, I'm Rob MacDonald and I am your host for Outer Space International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. This podcast is part of a series of podcasts that we are doing related to the historical memory of the Spanish Civil War, particularly the Solidarity Park project. So we're going to be talking to lots of artists involved in that project. What are their reasons to be involved? How do they see the fight against fascism and the far right today? But also their general political outlook, and touching on many of the questions that the podcast normally talks about. We're also going to make a bit of investigation into the role of women in the struggle for the historical memory today, the recuperation of the memory. We'd also like to thank the Diputació de Barcelona and Amicel, the International Brigadistas Association in Catalonia, for their support in this project. Okay, let's go to the podcast. Well, hello. Today we're joined by Annie Levin from Sing in Solidarity in New York. Hi, Annie, are you there?
How you doing, Rob?
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Well, first of all, who I think you are, Annie. I mean, you should correct me. You're one of the co-organisers of Sing in Solidarity. I believe you're a journalist and an activist in New York in the US. And that's more or less who I know you are. I know you from the choir from the Solidarity Park project. Your choir sang online for us in the festival in May and in October. You did two different songs. So that's more or less who I think you are. Could you expand on that for us a little bit?
Absolutely. I am the event coordinator for Sing in Solidarity. We have a organizing committee because we're a socialist choir, and these are all elected positions. And so I have been organizing the choir since one of our very first rehearsals in 2018, organizing most of our concerts, events, a lot of our rehearsals. When we do some street singing, street caroling, I'm usually involved. And what Sing in Solidarity is it's the Choir of Democratic Socialists of America, which is a political advocacy group in America. It's the biggest socialist organization in the United States in 80 years, pretty much, since the Communist Party in the 1930s. And we draw most of our members from the New York chapter of the DSA. DSA is, I think, probably most well known right now because of our endorsement of people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When I'm not volunteering with the choir, I am a journalist, and I write about the arts and labor and politics and pretty much everything in between.
Cool. Well, you're kind of a perfect fit for Outer Space podcast with that resume. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the choir and about that side of things, and then maybe we'll drift into the arts and labour questions because they're important too. So you say the choir started in 2018, yeah?
That's right.
Okay, and the members are mostly from New York, but they're not necessarily all from New York. Do you pull?
They're all from New York.
Okay, so cool. So, I mean, what does the choir do? Because these days there seems to be a growth in political choirs. I mean, what does the choir get up to? What makes it different from any sort of local normal choir that you could join?
Sure. Well, I think in United States we we have a tradition of labor choruses. It's not as substantial a tradition as it is in, say, the UK or somewhere like Germany, but we have some, especially in places with high union density like New York, and we're obviously not a union choir, we're DSA choir, but I think we're very much based on that model of the labor chorus, and we have the music that we sing is very similar to the music that's sung by left-wing labor choruses in the United States. We sing a lot of, I think, songs from like across the like revolutionary music spectrum. So that means for Americans, it's a lot of songs from the civil rights era. We sing songs from the Nueva Canción tradition in Latin America, and I think being a like American New York City choir, we have a lot of folk music, music from the bluegrass tradition in the U.S. from Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and when we do just all kinds of international music, we sing songs in Greek, French, German, Hebrew, no, not Hebrew, Yiddish, and Russian. That just to name a few off the top of my head. And we really go for not just music in our rehearsals, because they're also, they function as political meetings too, a little bit. They're rehearsals. It's mostly what we do. People show up and they sing and they have a good time. But this music is really connected with historical struggle. And we try to give as much context to the music that we give to our members who are, with very few exceptions, not professional singers, not particularly even amateur singers, just people who like to sing and who want to be involved in cultural organizing in a way that involves them in a musical community in DSA. And through that musical community, we try to build a base of not just singers, people who enjoy singing in concerts, singing in choirs, but base building the organization itself. Base building DSA. We have people from outside DSA who join the choir, who go on to other organizing projects politically, who would not otherwise do that, who go as a direct result of joining our chorus, go door-to-door canvassing, door knocking for local political candidates who share our politics, who get involved in various campaigns. And similarly, we get DSA members go out and show up at picket lines, show up at protests for different left-wing organizations in New York City. So it's kind of like a throughway, like a holding pen for, pen is probably not a good word, but it's a base building organization for left-wing causes, mostly DSA, but not just DSA.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's really interesting as well. There's a lot for me to unpack there, and I'll try and do it in little bits. I mean, first of all, how many people are in the choir? How many people belong to it?
I would say right now we have about 25 devoted members, and then maybe 40 sort of occasional members, and then our community itself that we've kind of built over the last 4 years. I think our mailing list we send out to hundreds of people every other week or so.
Yeah. So the periphery around is a lot bigger. I mean, there's two things I would really like to unpack there. One is the international aspects, but first, I really like this interesting how you pose the using of the choir as an organizing tool. Because that sort of fits with my perspective of why I do all the stuff I do. I mean, first of all, DSA is a broad church of left-wing people. You have a whole range within there. It's not a new organization, but it has mushroomed, hasn't it? And that would change the character of it. So it must be a very interesting dynamic within the DSA, I would imagine. So when you talk about it being sort of like an organizing tool, how could you explain? I mean, it's a bit like people in left-wing organizations are always thinking, how can we recruit people, get them into our group? How do we get people to help? There's not enough of us. We've got too much to do, this kind of stuff. So having something that brings people in as the opposite of having things that people get put off by, because that often happens in all organizations and left-wing ones as well. what, by your actions, how does that bring people in? Could you explain that a little bit more, how that works?
Sure. Well, I think we are still cruising off of the momentum that Bernie Sanders brought to the left in 2016 through his first presidential campaign, which DSA was an organization of, I think, about 7,000 in 2015. After the Sanders campaign and the election of Trump, it mushroomed to, I think, 30 or 40,000. Now we're at maybe 96,000. That was the last number I heard. And so we have been channeling a lot of the new members into the choir. So it's it's not just the chorus that's like drawing people in. It's we're kind of funneling people through a massive surge of activists and organizers, people who have gotten very excited by and also horrified by politics of the last 4 or 5 years. And we have worked very, very hard to build a warm community. You're sort of like a church within the DSA, and of a small group of very, very devoted people who like each other, like hanging out together, like singing together. I'll probably talk later on about what it is about singing that that helps to build bonds of solidarity in a group like DSA, where people come from very different political traditions on the left. But and through that community, we have then worked very, very hard. I mean, that's kind of the secret to organizing is there are no shortcuts. It is always hard, and the bigger the project, the harder you have to work, the more one-on-ones you have to have. And so through years of we channeled some of that energy from the Bernie campaign, and then through years and years of organizing, got together a core group of people who are now willing to, back in 2020, before the pandemic, we all went and campaigned for Bernie Sanders in his 2020 campaign. And so we had there's somebody, my friend Dana Steer, who started the choir, he's a union organizer who also is a former off-Broadway actor. He was in musical theater for a very long time. And that combination of things, having, the music going and having labor going for us, brought a lot of skill, a lot of talent into the group. And I think that there's a lot of untapped talent among artists who are also leftists that can be channeled into groups like ours. But Dana and, some other organizers, we were able to stick Bernie Sanders choir organizers into a bunch of cars, drive us all up to New Hampshire for the for canvassing for the Bernie's primary. I think at one point, weren't all choir people, but they were all DSA people who were organized by the choir. I think we had 100 people up in a couple tiny little snow-covered towns in New Hampshire in the dead of winter, going door to door for Bernie Sanders, and then at night we'd all meet in our volunteer housing, and we would sing together, and we'd make meals together, and we'd sing together.
I really like this perspective you put about having a warm community within the political landscape that we're in, because quite often it's uncomfortable, and as you say, there is no shortcuts. It's work, and more phone calls and more work, and then getting it wrong and starting again and more work, and there's no other way around that. I mean, Solidarity Park itself is an attempt to be a bit of a unity, warm family place, and I think artists instinctively understand that collectiveness of those, making something comfortable and nice and access to people, maybe not all artists, but I think there's a common thread between left-wing artists of this kind of approach, and Solidarity Park's definitely that. It sounds like what your building is, and also for me, I think this connection between the workers' movement and the artists' movement, there has to be an interaction much more. If we're going to build a strong workers' movement, we have to build a strong defense of culture and culture within the workers' movement, which is often lacking. And maybe the other way around. Often artists, although think collectively, act individually, and I think sometimes bringing some of the methods of the workers' movements into the artist community is a positive thing as well, and therefore the participation aspect of Solidarity Park is very much about that. And I think one of the things I never used to, I'm not a singer. Yeah, I played in a band, I was the drummer. And I used to write the lyrics, and I fancied myself as a singer, but I was shit. That's how I felt about it. And that's how the rest of the band felt about it. This is years ago now. And so I had this sort of, I can't sing thing. I can't do that. And then I went recently on one of my projects. I was in Stockholm and no, it was in Gothenburg, sorry, and accidentally came across the Youth International Choir competition. I was like, okay, this is part of the festival that I was in. And so I thought I'd go and have a listen, and I was taken away by the power of this choir singing. And ever since then, I changed my sort of dynamic with it, but I still don't sing in a choir, and I definitely have not for me, but I there seems to be lots of friends now that are joining these things. And I noticed one of your articles, you talked a little bit about people singing and community and these kind of things. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Because I think for me personally, and for anybody out there listening, thinking, oh yeah, choir is very nice, a bit romantic, la 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 la, and all the rest of it, but actually, it's not for me. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I just wrote about this in an article for Yes magazine. There is, like, every revolutionary, movement, deserving of the name, more or less, has an accompanying singing culture. And I think movements, particularly successful movements, I feel like they give birth to a cultural superstructure. They give birth to, like, DSA, when it got big, a choir kind of blossomed out of it. I don't think that and I think beautifies the movement, gives a certain flavor to meetings and to the vision of DSA. I think that there have been, certainly in the civil rights movement, say the election of Salvador Allende in Chile in the 70s, is an accompanying song culture, accompanying folk culture that was part and parcel with that movement. And singing, I think particularly street singing, which is what I write about in the article, and the way that it's practiced by labor choruses or in a group like Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Choir, is really helpful in particularly like live action, particularly if the choir really knows what it's doing outside, like the Stop Shopping Choir, where you are the megaphone. You are a 30-person megaphone, and if all of those 30 people really know how to sing, then you can make just an enormous roar. So it's a little bit like the mic check from Occupy Wall Street, only like much more functional, much more planned. And so you can communicate a message really loud and clear. But I think even more than that, it's like you are a formidable sight to the people. You look like a group that's organized. Like a choir is literally in harmony with each. You are singing together. You are singing all the same words. So it appears like a show of strength.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all whirring in my mind, because I've got a lot to think. I think a lot about the power of art and how the workers' movement needs to embrace it and this kind of thing. And I think the example you're giving there is one of participation, but also one of this idea. What did you say? 30-person megaphone. It's a nice the idea that you're singing together and a message, and there's unity in it. That's I was I think the attractiveness, creating a culture around the workers' movement is very important, and I think to make it attractive as well as on point. And I also remember I think it was in the late 90s, maybe a bit before that. And there was a lot of drumming, a lot of samba bands at demonstrations. And I love drumming. I'm a drummer, and I was like, yeah, let's get these things going. Let's have more of this. And then people were saying, no, but there's no political message to it. Whereas, of course, when you're singing, it's got that same power, but it has the message connected directly, which I think is very important. And you think there's actually something that it does for the person, I mean, I know what it was like to be in a band. And that was, we were 7 pieces by the end of what we were doing, and the camaraderie that we had, when it was good, of course, because these things go bad, don't they? But when it was good, the camaraderie was something special, and something maybe that the left needs to really. It's our powerful thing, our unity, eh? So do you think the actual participation and singing with each other has a very particular effect on the people, or
I mean, there have been like peer-reviewed scientific studies about what singing does to groups of people, about how it increases feelings of connectivity, and I think for the purpose of say political action, it also makes us able to tolerate pain longer, like actual physical pain. So if you're on a picket line in a snowstorm and you've got 6 more hours to go until the next group of picketers shows up to relieve you, like singing is what's going to get you there, keep you warm, get you that extra 45 minutes, and it's also makes you feel much more connected to your your comrades. It builds this fellow feeling that I think it's very, very ancient, that fellow feeling. Like I know, like we think that it's theorized that we, human beings sang even before we talked. Like before language, there was music. And I think choral music, and it's also choral dancing, is a fundamental part of how we think about community and how we build groups of people to take action together. And I think it goes back to the origins of the species.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've actually last December, not this December, I took a bit of time off social media, and I was just exhausted like you get. And I actually thought, what should I do? And I started listening to music again, because I stopped listening. And then I started studying a little bit about evolution and art, because I was quite interested in the role of art in evolution. The traditional and correct, I think, sort of Marxist view of the hand and the tool and the means of production and all that. And I was quite interested about where did art fit in that? And I come to a broad conclusion. I spoke about it in podcasts in the past, that art was like if you like, or creativity, a better way, was the eureka moment. It was the moment of decision making, and I've sort of leveled out that that's what creativity is. It's just when you have to think about what I'm going to say right next, I've got to think creatively, and I make a choice, and that connects with how the process work. And I've just been listening to some stuff on language and evolution, because the other part is the connection of information and language. And what you're saying there about singing being before we even spoke is about this, the resonance of sound, maybe. Is that where you're going with that thought? Because I know as a drummer, when the bass player was playing well and in the right place, next to the right ear, and I vibrated with the music, I played much better. I know I've gone on a couple of tangents there, but I'm quite interested in developing this little idea about sort of singing and evolution.
Sure. If I can follow, I think Chomsky writes about this a little bit, where like before we had language as we know it, there were still sounds that we might recognize as music, that human beings made, that was used to communicate with each other, that I believe the idea is that like song preceded language. Language is what came out of the creation of music.
Yeah, no, fascinating. I just think this sort of stuff, we can go off down a rabbit hole with this, I guess, and go too far. But it's certainly interesting. And I think it's important that we sort of at least understand what process it is when we're singing together. And I think also as a young guy, there's two things that used to hit me with singing. One was going to football, and singing shitty songs about the other team or whatever, but you were in a pack and it was powerful. And the other was at the age of 15 as well. Personally for me, watching South African youth fighting apartheid, and you mentioned that in your article, and that hit me. The toy and the singing and the dancing and if you like, there has an element of the tribalism in that, an element of the tribalism in football. Tribalism is probably not the right word for where I'm going with this, but that idea of us coming together and singing is very much part of showing our collective power. Maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that you're formidable when there's a lot of you and you're singing. You're singing in unison, and maybe you're even singing with a couple of harmony parts. Well, that's them on the street. What are they going to do when they've got their fists up? So what you seem stronger, you seem more formidable, and I think because you've learned how to work together, through the process of song, you probably are more formidable as a group. And I think that was certainly, how choral singing was used in the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s. The choral dancing, the choral singing, and that was very much just a huge part of the mass movement there, and I think and continues to be in the labor movement in South Africa.
Yeah, well, and worldwide in reality, maybe we need to, what we're doing with the podcast and with Solidarity Park and with your singing, it's one of the things that we really need to promote, and sort of leads on really to the other part I wanted to unpack at the beginning there, which was on the question of internationalism, because Solidarity Park, and yourselves being from New York, Solidarity Park project is born out of the sinking of the ship Solidarity de Barcelona, which was bringing international brigades to fight against fascism in the Spanish Civil War. And one of the, I suppose, the most important thing about the international brigades is they were people from all around the world coming to fight what they saw correctly was, the front of the battle, for social change, but also they saw that if they didn't beat Franco, then we'd end up in the world war that we did have and the millions that would die. And, they had a vision for a socialist world, as you and me do. So that's where the Solidarity Park project comes. Our connection with singing Solidarity and having the same name was an obvious for me. But the other connection is the fact that on board the Solidarity de Barcelona, a third of the people were from the US. A third of the people that we know, at least, because, we have more of the record of the people that came from the US, and a third of them actually came from New York. So the actual history of the Solidarity de Barcelona that sank just off the coast of Margrat actually has a very strong connection with New York. And when I talk to the school students, I go into the schools here and we talk about the project, and I say, well, why do these people come from so far away? They're not coming on their holidays this time. They're coming from all over the world, but actually what happened here, there's the historic memory of that village of Margaret Damai is actually the same history of people in New York and some of the families and whatever. So there's a strong connection, that internationalism, and why you sang at the Solidarity Park festival. And I'd like to ask you a little bit about the internationalism of the group, because you sang in the October festival that we did, you sang the Internationale in 6 languages, I think, and that obviously shows that you have 6 languages at least within your small, well, reasonably big, but not huge choir. So what role does internationalism play? And I ask that because you're American as well, because sometimes people see America as, they think they're the whole world. I never understand why you think you can have the World Series with a sport that nobody else plays. Well, that's not entirely true, but sometimes people internationally look at the US like that. So I'm interested in the internationalism of your project.
Yeah, I think that our choir from the very beginning, our goal was to sing the music of the international socialist left. And, something that gets said a lot in DSA is that for your socialism to be deserving of the name, it must be international. And I think we are abiding by that idea that you cannot sit at the heart of empire in New York City and be a socialist and not be aware of what your end goals are, and of what the empire that, let's face it, plenty of people in New York City, DSA, are profiting off of the suffering of people in the global South as a direct result of imperial involvement. And so it's the only conscionable way, I think, to practice our form of politics.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I think we've covered a couple of things there: the nature of singing, internationalism, what your choir is about. I think maybe for today we can leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Annie. And
you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll put a link to some of your articles in the podcast. People can have a look at that, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you in May next year in Margaret, and the blossoming of the international choir project that we're starting to get together. So thank you very much again, and I'll speak to you again soon. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Bye bye now.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have something to say to us, then join our Facebook group or contact us at outaspace.com. That's outa-space.com. See you soon.